Welcome back to the Presence Podcast. This is another deep dive where we take really fascinating sources, pull them apart, and try to bring you the core insights. You know, the kind that help us feel a bit more connected.
Make things click a little differently.
Exactly. And today, we're plunging back into the world of Matias De Stefano. We're drawing from a conversation he had on the Align Podcast YouTube channel.
Ah, yes, Matias. We've explored his ideas before, haven't we?
We have. And every time, it feels like there's another layer to uncover. He just connects things.
Oh.
Things you wouldn't normally put together.
He certainly does. A unique perspective.
So our mission today is really to journey through his thoughts on some big topics from this source. The interconnectedness of life and death, for instance, and the surprising role of trauma in basically everything.
Which is a huge one.
Yeah. And sexuality, but maybe not just in the way we usually think about it.
Beyond the purely biological.
Right. And then there's geometry, how shapes might actually influence our reality, our minds.
Fascinating stuff.
And finally, wrapping it up with conscious living, but placed within this huge sweep of evolutionary time. So we're pulling out the key nuggets, specifically from this conversation, to help understand these complex ideas through his particular lens.
It's a framework that really broadens the view, doesn't it? Almost cosmic.
It does. So for all of us, wanderers out there, you know, those of us who are curious, always seeking presence and deeper understanding, we invite you to explore this tapestry with us.
Lean in.
Yeah. If these kinds of deep dives resonate, if you enjoy getting beneath the surface with us, please do take just a second right now to like this exploration and subscribe to the show.
It really does help us keep bringing these conversations to you.
It absolutely does. Okay. So where do we start? The foundation seems to be his view on life and death.
Right. And it's fundamental to everything else he talks about. He doesn't see them as, you know, opposites. Stop and start.
Not like a switch flipping off.
No. More like parts of the same continuous wave. Dynamic. Always moving.
Okay, a wave. How does he explain that?
Well, the analogy he uses is pretty intuitive. Think of an ocean wave. Life is the wave cresting, going up. That's the part representing tension, pressure, the water's gathered, held.
Right, building up.
Exactly. And death. That's not the wave disappearing, it's the release of that tension, the water moving back down.
Returning.
Returning to the ocean, yeah. He uses these really relatable images, like death is like finally taking off a really tight shoe after a long day.
Oh, I can feel that relief just thinking about it.
Right, or just stepping back into the vastness of the ocean after being that single defined wave. It's a release, a return to the whole.
And this tension, the up part of the wave, life, it's not necessarily bad in his view.
Not at all. It's framed as completely necessary. You need that tension, that process of gathering and holding form to complete a specific geometry, a structure.
It's like you have to build the wave before it can crash.
Precisely. You have to experience that pressure, that shaping, to have something meaningful to release when the wave comes down.
So the release, death, is like the expansion of everything held in that life.
Exactly. All the information, the structure, the energy gathered during life's tension, it gets liberated, unfolded. The structure dissolves, releasing its stored potential.
Okay, that makes sense. But then the obvious question comes up, right? If death is relief, this release, why not just, you know, seek it early? End the tension.
It's a critical point. And Matias is very clear here, but maybe not in a standard moralistic way. He doesn't frame ending life prematurely as a sin.
No. What then?
He describes it as chaotic. Fundamentally chaotic within this energetic system. It complicates things enormously.
Chaotic. How so? Does he give an analogy for that too?
He does, and it's a good one. Imagine building a house. You're laying foundations, putting up walls. That's the life process, the tension of creation.
Okay, I'm with you.
Now, what if halfway through, before it's finished, before you even know its purpose, what you could do in the finished house, you start tearing down the walls you just built?
You just have a mess. Rubble, no house.
Exactly. No structure to inhabit. You're lost among the pieces. And to start building again, you have to go back, pick up those pieces, rebuild the foundation, remake the walls. It breaks the process of completion.
So it doesn't destroy the energy, the blocks maybe, but it messes up the building process.
Precisely. It makes everything way more complicated, confusing. And in his terms, it takes more time to figure out where you were or what shape you were trying to build in the first place.
Right. So this idea in some religions about suicide being a sin, He suggests maybe that started as something else.
He kind of hints at that, yeah. That perhaps those injunctions, before they maybe became rigid moral rules, could have originated as practical advice, like a structural guideline.
Like, hey, don't do this. It makes the journey harder, more chaotic.
Sort of. A way to help people avoid this messy, complicated, energetic state. Maybe aimed at making the soul's evolution smoother, faster, even if it later got framed as strict morality. Practical wisdom, perhaps.
Okay, so when he talks about losing time or things getting complicated, who is the you that loses time? Is it me, the person?
That's a key distinction he makes. He specifies it's the soul that experiences this delay or complication, not the spirit.
Soul, not spirit. What's the difference in his view?
Well, he seems to see the spirit as maybe more fundamental, always present. The soul is the particular journey, the specific construct being built through experience. It's the soul's unique process that gets disrupted.
Got it. And time itself. How does that fit in? It's not like losing hours on a clock, right?
No, not linear clock time. He describes time more like waves or pulses of energy, like the ones and zeros that make up a digital picture.
Okay, individual bits of information.
Yeah. The soul, as these energy pulses, isn't destroyed if the process breaks. Energy cycles, it renews. But the time it takes to generate those specific beats, that unique pattern needed to form a complete image or shape of consciousness, that time is lost.
So you interrupt the sequence.
Exactly. Like hitting pause on a specific program that was creating that particular form. You then have to sort of rewind or reconstruct those beats to finish the intended structure you were building within your consciousness.
And there's no specific place to go, like heaven or somewhere else.
Not in this model, no. The focus isn't on arriving at a destination out there. It's all about completing the shape within you.
The construct of consciousness you're building through life's tension.
Right. The journey is internal. The completion is about unfolding your own potential form, your specific geometric pattern.
Okay, that's a profound way to look at life and death.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned this connects to trauma.
Directly. It links right back to that idea of tension and the shape we're forming. And this is where, like you said, it gets really interesting and maybe challenging.
How so? What does he suggest about trauma?
Well, he takes the basic meaning of trauma, a wound, and scales it up dramatically. He suggests that trauma isn't just something bad that happens to us occasionally.
Yeah.
He posits that it's incredibly fundamental, maybe even inherent to being a separate self. He goes so far as to suggest that all of our personality,
All of it.
everything we think our habits, our defenses, our identity, is in essence a form of trauma, or at least a compensation for a wound.
Wow. Where does that initial wound come from then?
He traces it back to the very first split. The primordial separation, going from being one, unified, maybe infinite, and then cutting ourselves in half, becoming distinct, like the first cell dividing.
That first separation from the whole is the root trauma.
In the system, yes, and everything that follows in our personality, our way of being, is somehow a response to or protection against or a compensation for that initial wound and all the subsequent divisions.
Can you give an example? That sounds very abstract.
Sure. He talks about, say, a man feeling this intense need to be masculine in a very specific, maybe rigid way. Must provide, can't show weakness, can't cry.
Okay, a stereotype, but yeah.
In Matias's view, that might not be his core essence. It could be rooted in trauma, maybe a compensation for wounds his ancestors experienced. Immense pressure on them to fulfill that role, perhaps.
So it gets passed down, like an energetic pattern.
Exactly, a pattern or memory in the lineage. So he now carries that pressure, that compensation. There's an internalized trauma telling him a man must be this way, which stops him expressing his full self.
And it might not even be from something that happened directly to him in his life.
That's a key point he makes. Often, he suggests, these patterns are compensations for traumas that aren't even personally ours. They come from ancestors carried in our cells, our energy field.
Or the environment.
Or the environment we grew up in, which is itself shaped by collective traumas. We inherit these ways of being as compensations for unresolved energies from way back.
Okay, that's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
If our whole personality is potentially a trauma response, how on earth do we navigate that? Do we just try to fix it all?
Well, his approach is maybe counterintuitive. He doesn't seem to advocate fighting it or escaping it right away.
Right.
His approach is more about allowing yourself to go deep into the trauma, to feel it fully without judging it.
Just be present with it.
Yeah. He shared his own experience with depression really openly, talking about his personal shit, as he put it, during his I Am project. He said it felt like constant therapy, not teaching.
So not presenting a perfect image, but showing the struggle.
Exactly. Allowing everything, the light, the shadow, the really difficult stuff to be seen and felt.
That seems very different from some spiritual approaches that focus only on bliss or transcendence.
He contrasts it sharply with that idea of using spirituality as an escape hatch, decorating over the cracks.
Focusing only on the positive, trying to stay up there.
Right. Instead of doing the necessary work of facing and integrating the difficult, messy parts of being human, he sees that avoidance as ultimately unhelpful.
And he connects this allowing to femininity.
To the wisdom of femininity, yeah. Not biological sex, but an energetic quality. The capacity to just let every emotion, every energy be felt, to let it move through you without immediately labeling it good or bad.
Like riding the wave of feeling.
Yeah, a fluidity, a willingness to just be with what is. He contrasts that with what he calls a common masculine tendency again. Energetic, not just biological, which is the impulse to fix things.
To stop the bad feeling, solve the problem.
Exactly. Feeling like a failure if you can't make the discomfort go away instantly. But that fixing impulse, he suggests, can actually interrupt the natural flow, trapping the energy instead of letting it release.
So trying too hard to be happy all the time could actually be counterproductive.
That's what he suggests. Our society's focus on pursuing happiness can create this constant internal war. We label emotions as bad, try to escape them.
But life isn't about constant happiness, is it? It's waves.
Exactly. In his model, the only real finish to the tension wave is death. Everything else is process. The constant push, I need this so I can be happy, keeps us focused externally, often denying our present emotional state.
And that unexpressed stuff.
It builds up.
It builds pressure, yeah. And eventually it might explode, individually or even collectively, as trauma or conflict. So being truly spiritual, in this view, isn't about being blissed out all the time.
No, it's about being fully present everywhere within yourself, including the difficult places, the hell within, allowing the whole spectrum.
That links to what he said about not trying to be something you're not.
He uses that famous line from the U.S. Declaration of Independence, the pursuit of happiness. He suggests that framing happiness as something you constantly pursue might actually wire dissatisfaction into the cultural system if you're always chasing it.
You never feel like you've arrived.
Exactly. You're always looking ahead, seeking something you don't have now.
He contrasts that with other cultures.
Yeah, cultures where maybe the focus is simpler, relaxation, family, good food, finding satisfaction in the present in connection, not needing a constant peak state of happiness, contentment in just being. He makes a really challenging point here, though, about healing.
What's that?
That often our attempts to heal the world, or even ourselves, are done through the lens of the trauma we're trying to fix.
We operate from the wound itself.
Yeah. Our actions, our intentions, might still be rooted in our own compensations. Instead of acting from natural evolution or allowance, we're trying to fix things using the energy of the original problem, sometimes leading to actions that are more about, say, showing off how healed we are, rather than balanced creation.
Okay, that's a deep one. Let's shift now to another complex area he discussed. Sexuality. How does that fit into this framework of division and trauma?
Right. He starts, characteristically, with the word itself. Sexuality, from the Latin secere, to cut, to divide.
So fundamentally, it's about making sections, distinctions.
Exactly. The ability to distinguish yourself as this or that, to select and divide.
The most obvious form being biological sex, right? Masculine and feminine sections for reproduction.
That's the most basic biological layer, yeah. Penetration, reception, producing life. Clear biological division.
So he expands it beyond just biology.
Oh, yeah, definitely. He talks about it on multiple levels. On a soul level, there are masculine and feminine powers or energies.
Like assertiveness and receptivity.
Things like that. Leadership, structure, action versus nurturing, fluidity, connection. These are energetic potentials anyone can use, regardless of biology, for different roles in life. Tools the soul has.
Different sections of ability.
Right. And then on a mental level, sexuality is how our minds divide concepts. Good, bad, happy, sad, right, wrong. Our whole way of categorizing reality is a form of mental sectioning.
So biology, soul powers, mental categories, all forms of sexuality as division.
That's the idea. But here's the problem he identifies. Trauma in human experience often gets intensely located in the genitals.
Why is this there specifically?
Because they're the physical point of that fundamental biological division, male-female, seen as the origin of who we are biologically. So because the trauma gets anchored there,
We end up sexualizing everything else.
we funnel all these other layers, the soul powers, the mental divisions, even things like chakras, into the discussion about biological genital sex. Everything becomes about that physical distinction.
Which leads to those intense arguments about what is a woman, what is a man, based purely on biology.
Exactly, often ignoring the soul and mind layers entirely. And he suggests that this fixation is heavily fueled by societal trauma, generations of being told you can't be this, you must be that.
So the wounds around identity and expression get projected onto the biological difference.
That seems to be his point. It becomes the battleground for much deeper, unresolved traumas about limitation and acceptance.
He shared something really personal about this, didn't he? About his own experience.
He did, very vulnerably. He talked about remembering past lives as a woman, many of them.
Wow. And how did that affect him in this life, being biologically male?
He said in his youth it created this profound disconnect, even disgust with his male body. He remembered wanting to be pregnant, looking at himself and feeling, this isn't me.
That must have been incredibly difficult. How did he understand that feeling?
He saw it not as pathology, but as a memory, held in his water, his cells, his mind, a resonance from past forms wired deep into his system.
So, not something to be fixed, but understood.
Yes. He described a long process, years of inner work, understanding these layers, learning to love his current cellular design, the body he chose for this life.
So, he consciously chose to be male in this life, despite those memories.
He consciously chose to accept and embrace being male, yeah. Not by forcing it, but through integration and understanding the totality of his being, including those past life echoes.
Based on that, he presents a pretty radical idea about perception and identity, doesn't he?
He does. That every perception we have of ourselves, including gender identity, is essentially a pattern wired in the brain. It becomes our felt truth.
Regardless of whether it matches external biology.
Regardless. And crucially, he suggests these deeply held perceptions, these internal truths, can be born from trauma, from wounds, compensations, patterns repeated for generations in our cells.
So our sense of self might be shaped by ancient wounds and memories.
That's the implication. Even intense masculinity or a firmly held gender identity, any strong perception might stem from some form of trauma, some response to division or limitation in the past.
And if we recognize that about all perceptions,
maybe we could stop defending our own truth as the only right way. If we see them all as perceptions, born from unique, complex, trauma-shaped histories.
we could accept differences more easily. Less conflict.
That seems to be the hope. The conflict comes from insisting my perception, born from my trauma memory complex, is the objective reality everyone else must adopt.
This naturally leads to the sensitive topic of physical sex changes.
Yeah.
How does he view that within this framework?
Right, and he speaks carefully here, stressing it's his perspective within this energetic model. He views the act of physically altering the genitals as creating another trauma in the system.
Another trauma. Why?
He explains it by going back to the biological base. He sees the genitals as the primary hub of biological power, where Kundalini energy arises.
Okay.
So biologically altering, or as he puts it, mutilating them, from his viewpoint, distorts or diminishes the source of biological power and its connection to the whole energetic system. It creates a biological effect.
But he's not saying it's morally wrong.
No, he's very clear about that. Not wrong or bad ethically. He sees it as another choice available in the universe, stemming from that complex mix of perception, memory, and biology.
Just a choice with biological and energetic consequences within his model.
Exactly. A biological effect different from the mental or soul level, though the choice itself adds another layer of trauma or complexity. He even likens the biological impact to losing that power source through disease or accident.
So, observing an effect rather than making a judgment.
That seems to be the intention, supporting people's choices while noting the energetic impact within his framework.
Okay, let's shift again to geometry. How did shapes fit into all this?
This is another cornerstone. He sees the individual, the soul, as attempting a geometrical completion throughout life.
Trying to form a specific shape.
Yeah, and chaos, that unresolved tension, the unintegrated stuff, that's what disrupts the formation of that intended shape.
Like static interfering with a clear picture.
Good analogy. Just like the life wave seeks completion, our inner structure, our consciousness, is striving for a specific geometrical form.
And what's the ideal shape? The goal?
The ultimate harmonious completion, representing the divine or source, he suggests, is a perfect sphere, with an egg shape inside, apparently.
A sphere. But we aren't spheres.
Well, we're like fragments, angles of that perfection. But our basic building blocks, our cells, they tend towards spheres naturally, like water droplets.
Okay.
He says the divine principle, the ultimate sphere, fractalizes. It breaks itself down into different angles and shapes. That's what creates all the diversity we see, molecules, structures, everything.
So getting back to the source, or divinity, means becoming a sphere again.
Becoming that sphere within yourself, yeah. Not by one person living everything, but by transcending separation, integrating all your fragments, rounding out the corners.
So you contain everything within your own complete form.
Yeah.
Soft, integrated.
Exactly. And this leads to a really practical, fascinating idea about our environment. He uses the water analogy again. Water takes the shape of its container, right?
Right.
He suggests our inner water, our mind, consciousness, energy, takes the shape of the physical space we inhabit.
Wait, the buildings we live in shape our minds.
That's the idea. You're not just in the space. Your inner substance is taking the shape of that space, that container.
So square buildings.
Give the mind structure, grounding, a connection to matter. Square houses, offices, they foster linear thinking, focus on form.
And circular structures, caves, domes.
They facilitate expansion, spiritual awakening, no hard corners, so the mind flows more easily, circularly, more connected to the intangible.
Even traveling to places with different architecture changes our inner shape.
He suggests it does. Your inner water adapts, integrates new forms as you move through different geometries.
That explains why ancient cultures often use circles for important gatherings.
Council circles, tribal circles, everyone feels equal, connected to the center. Contrast that with a rectangular boardroom table.
Yeah, very different feeling. Hierarchical.
Even leading a class in a circle versus rows changes the whole energy.
So are squares bad or immature compared to circles or spheres?
He clarifies that. It's not good or bad. Different potentials, different wisdoms. The circle has wisdom, fluidity, connection, expansion, feminine childlike energy.
Okay.
The square has wisdom too. Stability, structure, containment, manifestation, masculine energy. You need both.
Too much square is rigid, too much circle is formless.
Exactly. Problems arise from imbalance, fracture versus dissolving into nothing.
So the ideal is integration.
Integration. He points to shapes like the Pentaki's dodecahedron, the soccer ball shape.
I love that one.
It combines elements of other shapes, dodecahedron and icosahedron, to create a sphere with structure. It integrates the masculine structure and the feminine sphere, harmony and form.
And our challenge today isn't necessarily achieving that perfect integration fully,
but healing the trauma between those aspects, the masculine and feminine principles within us and society. That's where the tension is raw right now.
And when we face that, things get complicated. Like the Pride movement example.
Yeah, he used that example, a positive intention, affirming identity. But sometimes expressing pride, a forceful, maybe masculine energy within a communal system, can still come from trauma, like showing off because you weren't allowed to be, rather than balanced creation.
So many movements or projects might be built from trauma, not natural evolution.
That's what he suggests. It links back to power versus force. Power allows, flows. Force imposes ego, often driven by trauma. We try to create through the wound.
And different cultures have different geometries for happiness, like that India study.
Exactly. Western ideas of the good life, small family, material wealth, didn't fit their geometry, which valued large families for well-being. Different paths, different shapes. Conflict arises when we insist on one path for everyone.
Okay, this leads us to the final section about conscious living. How does awareness change things?
It changes everything. He talks about conscious engagement versus just repeating patterns unconsciously.
Even with things we think are bad for us, like junk food or smoking.
Yeah, if you're doing it consciously aware of why, present with the act and the impulse driving it, it transforms.
Wow.
It stops being about being a slave to a pattern or denial. I shouldn't, but I can't stop. It becomes a process of learning. You're using the act as a tool to understand the underlying trauma.
He gave a really personal example here too, didn't he? About sugar.
He did. Very moving. His trauma with sugar, he linked it to his grandfather who died of diabetes.
And he suggested diabetes could stem from a lack of love.
A deep wound around not being wanted, yeah. His grandfather was apparently the survivor of a fifth abortion attempt and wasn't truly wanted by his own father.
Wow.
So Matias realized his own strong draw to sweets wasn't just a craving. It was a way of communicating with his grandfather's energy, a compensation.
Compensating how?
Using sugar to give himself and energetically offer his grandfather's memory, the sweetness and happiness that was missing from his grandfather's life. countering that wound of not being wanted.
Using it as a tool to interact with ancestral trauma.
Exactly. Unconsciously at first, then consciously. Even though it wasn't good for him physically, it served this deeper purpose of addressing the trauma.
So many of our stupid habits might be these compensations for traumas not even our own.
That's the profound suggestion. We carry and reflect these unresolved energies, but awareness transforms it.
Wow.
You shift from being a slave to the pattern to using it as a tool. You see the why. And when you truly understand the root, process the wound.
The need for the compensation might just dissolve.
Often, yes. You don't need the sugar, the habit anymore because the underlying trauma has been seen and integrated.
He also observed something about the pace of things today, right? Everyone seems in a rush.
A rush to get enlightened, be the good person, fix everything now, amplified by social media, information overload.
Like we need to achieve spiritual perfection by next Tuesday.
Sort of, yeah. And his antidote is perspective. Look at nature's timescale.
What was the example? A plant.
A plant taking 250 million years to evolve a flower.
250 million years.
Puts our weekend retreats in perspective, doesn't it? There's no inherent rush for our evolution, our integration. It's a vast, slow process.
And that perspective helps us realize what?
That most of us are just living through traumas, navigating these incomplete inherited geometries, and even our best efforts to heal or help often come from that trauma perspective.
Even his own project, he admits, is rooted in his trauma.
He does. But by expressing it, it becomes useful to others on similar paths.
So accepting this allows us to flow more, be used by the system.
Yeah, instead of trying to enforce our ego's will onto it, flowing with the huge, slow currents of evolution rather than fighting them, riding the wave, not commanding the ocean.
And this changes how we see others, too. Our parents, maybe.
Immensely. If there's no rush and they are perfectly where they need to be in their process, maybe dealing with deep, ancient traumas,
we don't need to fix them or judge them.
we can just offer love, acceptance, tenderness, free ourselves from the pressure to change them, just be present with them in the shared unfolding.
Wow. Okay. That really ties everything together. What an expansive journey through his perspective today.
It really covered a lot of ground. Life and death as a wave, trauma as foundational, sexuality as layered division.
Geometry shaping consciousness,
Yeah.
conscious living within that vast evolutionary timescale.
It definitely gives us, as wanderers, a different lens. Seeing challenges, personal and collective, maybe as these incomplete geometries, these inherited, unintegrated traumas.
It feels like it gives permission to slow down, doesn't it? To be more compassionate and curious about our own patterns and the world's.
Less pressure, more patience, recognizing the deep history within everything.
Absolutely.
So maybe a final thought for you, our listeners, to sit with. Think about the main shapes and spaces you spend your time in, your home, your workplace, the paths you walk. How might those constant geometries be subtly shaping the water of your inner world? Your thoughts, your feelings, just something to notice.
That's a great takeaway. And if people want to explore Matias's work further,
He mentioned his Instagram, Matias De Stefano, has a link tree with resources. And he's apparently working on a new website to help beginners find a starting point.
good to know. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive on the Presence podcast.
Always a pleasure to explore these ideas.
Until next time.